You've been told that leadership begins with confidence, with vision, with charisma. But none of those things come first. The real beginning is much quieter. It's the moment you stop protesting how unfair the world is and start studying how it actually works. You were never powerless. You were just playing a game you didn't know existed. Because most people aren't resisting the system, they're reinforcing it by hoping it will be kind to them. But kindness isn't the currency here. Clarity is. And the longer you wait for fairness, the more you'll keep calling your silence virtue. Machiavelli didn't write for the ruthless. He wrote for those who were tired of being ruled by the emotions of others. He wrote for people like you, the ones who feel the pull to lead but keep waiting for permission. Make sure you stay until the end, because that's where you'll understand how power works when no one gives it to you. Most men don't fail to lead because they're weak. They fail because they were trained to behave, not by tyrants, by school teachers, by quiet disapproval, by systems that reward those who don't disrupt the order. You weren't broken. You were shaped slowly, invisibly, into someone who prioritizes compliance over clarity. So now, when leadership calls, it doesn't sound like a challenge. It sounds like a threat. Because to lead, you'd have to stop being digestible. You'd have to stop dressing your silence in politeness. You'd have to stop explaining your boundaries as confusion. That's the part no one told you. That obedience has a cost. That every time you avoid conflict to preserve comfort, you surrender authorship over your life. It starts small. You stay quiet in the meeting. You nod when you disagree. You say yes because you don't want to seem difficult. But underneath it all, you start to disappear. And the more you disappear, the more the world confirms what you fear, that you don't matter, that your words carry no weight, that your presence changes nothing. So you chase approval, thinking it will give you influence, but it only gives you permission to keep chasing. Machiavelli never wrote about being nice. He wrote about being seen. And what he saw was this: the world respects presence, not passivity; clarity, not comfort. What you call humility might just be hesitation. What you call goodness might just be fear. And fear, when left unnamed, becomes a perfect tool of control. The most powerful form of obedience isn't forced. It's felt. That sick, low pull in the stomach. The moment you consider saying no, and something inside you flinches, not because it's wrong, but because you were taught that refusal is betrayal. You weren't trained with whips. You were trained with guilt. Guilt turns boundaries into burdens. It makes self-respect feel like selfishness. It tricks you into asking for less and calling it maturity. This is how power works when it wants to remain invisible. It doesn't need to punish you directly. It just needs to give you a conscience that punishes itself. So now, every time you consider standing your ground, you don't hear your voice. You hear every subtle warning ever given to you. Don't make things harder. Don't be dramatic. Don't be selfish. And without knowing it, you bend. You give in. You over-explain. You soften your truth until it becomes unrecognizable. But here's what Machiavelli understood. Those who feel guilty for having power are the first to hand it away. Because guilt doesn't just keep you silent, it convinces you that silence is noble. And once that illusion settles in, you start confusing self-erasure with character. You start believing that your discomfort is a necessary tax for keeping others comfortable. But comfort is not the measure of morality, and guilt is not a compass. It's a leash. And the moment you realize that, you start to question who's holding the other end. You were rewarded for being agreeable, not because it made you strong, but because it made you easier to manage. Nice boys get approval. Nice boys get invited. Nice boys get used. And then, when they burn out, they're told to be even nicer. This is the cycle that breaks men quietly. It doesn't come with catastrophe. It comes with 1,000 small concessions. each one disguised as maturity. You learn to say, "It's fine," before anyone asks. You over-apologize for boundaries that were never crossed. You shrink your expectations so that no one has to feel burdened by your needs. And when it finally becomes too heavy, you collapse inward, thinking it's your fault for not being good enough. But what if the collapse was never a failure of character? What if it was the result of living as a tool for other people's comfort? Machiavelli never once praised niceness, because niceness isn't a virtue, it's a tactic. And if you don't know who it's serving, it's probably not you. Genuine strength isn't loud, but it is unmoved. It doesn't betray itself to be liked. It doesn't need to be forgiven for existing. It doesn't confuse appeasement with peace. So if your kindness always comes at your own expense, it's not kindness anymore. It's fear dressed in diplomacy. And the longer you wear it, the more you forget who you were underneath. Because eventually the mask starts thinking it's your face. The world doesn't need you to be calm. It prefers you reactive. Because a reactive man is predictable. And a predictable man is easy to control. If they can trigger your guilt, they can guide your choices. If they can trigger your anger, they can discredit your voice. If they can trigger your shame, they can keep you silent while calling it your decision. Most men mistake their reactivity for passion. But passion without discipline is just leakage. It spills into arguments that go nowhere, defenses no one asked for, and explanations no one remembers. You can feel deeply and still move with clarity, but only if your feelings don't move you. This is where Machiavelli's insight cuts deeper. He never said, "Be emotionless." He said, "Be unprovoked." Not because feelings are dangerous, but because weaponized feelings make you unreliable. And in a world governed by perception, unreliability is suicide. Leadership, real leadership, doesn't mean being unaffected. It means feeling fully without being claimed by the feeling. Because the second your mood becomes the motor, you've handed the steering wheel to the moment. You're no longer leading anything. You're just reacting with better vocabulary. And the people around you, they sense it. They don't follow your emotion. They follow your containment. And if you can't hold yourself, no one will trust you to hold anything else. At some point, you were told that being strategic made you dangerous. Not because you were, but because someone else lost control of you. You were told to be transparent, to be open, to be emotionally available, even when no one earned access. You were told to trust your heart, even as it led you back into cycles that rewarded nothing but your own exhaustion. And when you started asking better questions, when you stopped offering full explanations, when you became deliberate instead of automatic, they said you were calculating, as if that was a flaw. But Machiavelli saw it clearly. A man without strategy is not noble, he's exposed. Because life isn't measured by how right you are, it's measured by how often you place yourself in positions where rightness matters. And the truth is, most people don't want to see you rise strategically. Because if you stop being driven by emotion, they lose their influence. You don't owe the world emotional transparency. You owe yourself strategic clarity. You don't have to explain your timing. You don't have to justify your stillness. You don't have to disclose your plan to prove your good intent. That's not secrecy. That's self-respect. Because clarity isn't just about what you say. It's about when you don't speak and how you move when no one sees you coming. Because the most dangerous man in the room is never the one making noise. It's the one moving without permission. Most men waste their energy defending themselves. They defend their intent, their character, their decisions, to people who were never going to understand them anyway. It's not leadership, it's spiritual customer service. Because when your identity is still built on being perceived correctly, you are always one misunderstanding away from collapse. This is where most men fall. They don't lose their direction, they lose their center, and then spend years trying to be clear to others before they ever become clear to themselves. But Machiavelli never said, win their approval. He said, shape their perception. And the difference is massive. Approval is reactive. It requires ongoing performance. Perception is structured. It's the consequence of consistent presence. You don't earn presence by talking more. You earn it by knowing when not to speak. You don't earn power by demanding respect. You earn it by being someone who doesn't flinch under pressure. Because people don't follow your words, they follow your weight. And that weight comes from what you ignore. You ignore the bait, you ignore the drama, you ignore the invisible demand to explain your every move. Not because you're passive, but because you've stopped offering your energy where it returns nothing. This isn't silence as avoidance. It's silence as structure, the kind of structure that holds even when the world starts pulling at you. Because when you finally stop reacting to noise, you start being recognized for your signal. The hardest belief to let go of is the one that says, if I do things right, life will reward me. That belief doesn't sound dangerous. It sounds moral. It sounds hopeful. But what it really is inherited confusion. Because fairness, as most people understand it, is not a principle. It's a longing. It's the hope that if you suffer beautifully enough, the world will see your effort and adjust itself accordingly. But Machiavelli was not interested in hope. He was interested in leverage. He saw that the world does not respond to virtue. It responds to visibility, not to your pain, but to your positioning. So the man who still leads with fairness, who still begs for reciprocity, who still thinks being good will make him safe, will always be stunned by betrayal. He won't understand why loyalty is not returned, why effort goes unrewarded, why truth is ignored. Because he built his compass around a fantasy that other people see the world the way he does. But clarity doesn't wait to be agreed with. Clarity doesn't demand fairness. It calculates, it adjusts, it builds conditions where reciprocity isn't begged for, it's incentivized. That's what most men miss. It's not about playing dirty. It's about no longer assuming the game is clean. You think people will do what's right? Maybe, but they will always do what benefits them first. And once you accept that, once you stop resenting it, you can finally begin to design systems that protect your value without having to plead for it. Machiavelli didn't call that manipulation. He called it realism, because people aren't blank slates, they're pressure systems. And leadership isn't about changing who they are, it's about arranging the conditions so that even their self-interest aligns with your clarity. That's not cruelty, that's intelligence. And if you still feel ashamed for thinking that way, ask yourself, who benefits from your confusion? Because the moment you stop expecting fairness, you gain the freedom to create something better than fair, something stable, scalable, and sovereign. Leadership isn't given. It's not earned through performance or unlocked through charm. It begins in one place, when you stop waiting to be led. Most men confuse sovereignty with confidence. But confidence is reactive. It grows when others affirm you. Sovereignty is what you have when no one does. It's the ability to guide yourself without applause, without clarity, without external confirmation. It's what allows you to speak last, move slowly, and hold your center, while everyone around you folds into noise. Because at some point, the desire to be understood has to die. Not because it was wrong, but because it kept you from becoming the one thing you were always meant to be, self-directed. Until that moment, you'll keep performing for connection. You'll overshare in search of safety. You'll make decisions not based on alignment, but on who might feel left out. And then you'll call it integrity. But Machiavelli saw what integrity without strategy becomes: powerless loyalty, exhausted virtue. Men who believe that being good is enough to be trusted. It's not, because people don't trust your values, they trust your consistency. And if your values change based on who's watching, you're not leading. You're negotiating your identity in real time. Sovereignty doesn't mean you never compromise. It means you don't abandon yourself to avoid tension. It means your decisions aren't determined by mood, but by mission. And most importantly, it means you don't let your past roles define your future reach. You are not the nice one, the helper, the safe pair of hands. You are not here to be predictable. You are here to be precise. Because the sovereign man does not beg for trust. He becomes the structure that others lean on when their own vision collapses. And if you want to carry that weight, you must first prove you can carry your own mind. Most men don't fail in public. They fail in private, in the quiet places where discipline is supposed to grow. Leadership is never built in the spotlight. It's built in the decisions no one sees, the mornings no one tracks, the silences no one claps for. The man who needs motivation will never become sovereign. Because motivation is an external rhythm, it rises and falls with mood, approval, and circumstance. But discipline is internal architecture. It's built through repetition, not reward. It's waking up before you're praised, speaking truth when no one will validate it, choosing alignment over comfort, again and again, without performance, without witness. That's the fracture. Victims wait to feel ready. Leaders train until readiness is irrelevant. Machiavelli never promised ease. He only promised that those who prepare will not panic. And that's the core of it. People follow the one who doesn't flinch, not because he's stronger, but because he's more rehearsed. So ask yourself, who are you when there's no one to impress? When no one will applaud your boundaries or notice your restraint, or understand why you keep saying no to what looks good from the outside? Because that version of you, the one who still moves with purpose even when the feedback disappears, is the one building a foundation that cannot be taken. Most people wait for structure to be given to them. Leaders create it, not because they feel like it, but because the cost of living without it is too high. And that structure becomes gravity. It starts pulling your life into alignment, not all at once, but piece by piece, through repetition, friction, and refusal. Refusal to collapse inward, refusal to over-explain, refusal to lower your standard just to feel momentarily safe. Because the man who can tolerate discomfort in private will always move differently in public. And that difference, that silent strength, is what makes leadership inevitable. There comes a moment when the world no longer needs your explanation, only your signal. Most men never reach it. They keep narrating their worth, defending their choices, justifying their presence. They confuse clarity with justification, thinking power must be translated to be real. But power doesn't need to be explained. It needs to be embodied. The most respected men are not the loudest. They are the most centered. They speak when it changes the room, not to prove they belong in it. And here is what Machiavelli understood before most ever saw it. People follow structure, not personality, not passion. Structure. Your presence becomes that structure. Only when you stop auditioning for belonging, because as long as you're still reacting, still flinching, still hoping for others to see your goodness, you're not leading, you're negotiating your visibility. The sovereign man does not do this. He doesn't beg to be seen. He sharpens himself until he cannot be ignored. He isn't respected because he demands it, but because he moves with too much clarity to be dismissed. That's what changes the room, not volume, not posture, but stillness earned through self-governance. You can say less if your direction says everything. You can do less if your presence has already drawn the boundary. You can explain less if your life reflects the values you no longer debate. Leadership, then, is not about conquering others. It's about no longer being conquered by your own avoidance. It's about carrying the weight of clarity in a world that constantly tries to blur you. And once that weight becomes normal, you stop needing the world to soften for you. You stop waiting to feel ready. You stop reacting. You move, not to be followed, but because you finally know exactly where you're going. You don't need to prove your strength. You need to stop apologizing for having it. You've spent enough years explaining your intent, waiting for fairness, softening your voice so you wouldn't be mistaken for a threat. But all that softness never protected you. It only delayed the moment you were meant to confront, that no one is coming to name your power for you. If you want to lead, you lead yourself first, out of guilt, out of the need to be understood, out of the emotional reflexes that made you predictable. Because the world isn't ignoring you, it's responding to your signal. And as long as that signal says, "I'm waiting for permission," you will keep being bypassed by people who aren't. Leadership doesn't wait. It doesn't flinch. It doesn't explain itself to people committed to misunderstanding. It watches. It calculates. And then, without spectacle, it moves. So the only question that matters now isn't how to lead them. It's whether you're willing to stop being led by the parts of you that still believe silence is safer than truth.